The pirates of Elizabethan England weren't just outlaws, they were often respected merchants and gentlemen, driven by ambition and national pride. The era blurred the line between piracy and naval warfare, as England under Queen Elizabeth I faced off against the powerful Spanish Empire. Lacking the resources for open war, England turned to privateers, state-sanctioned pirates to strike at Spanish treasure fleets. These sea dogs became the realm's unofficial navy, disrupting Spain's wealth and boosting England's fortunes. The risks were immense. Capture meant death, and the sea itself was unforgiving. Yet the promise of riches and glory lured thousands to this dangerous life. Their daring transformed them from mere sailors into national heroes. The exploits of these privateers laid the groundwork for England's rise as a naval superpower. In this crucible of risk and reward, the legend of the Sea Dogs was born. The Sea Dogs were a fascinating and formidable group. A loose brotherhood of English mariners, explorers charting new territories, merchants seeking lucrative trade routes, and state-sponsored pirates operating with a wink and a nod from the English crown. All united by a shared hunger for wealth, adventure, and a burning desire to challenge and ultimately humble the vast empire of Spain. They were driven by ambition and opportunity. Many of these daring individuals, like the legendary John Hawkins and the infamous Francis Drake, hailed from Devon's rugged and seafaring communities, where the ocean was both a livelihood and a way of life. From a young age, they were immersed in the world of sailing, learning the intricacies of navigation, mastering the art of trade, and understanding the harsh realities of life at sea. They weren't aristocrats born into privilege and power, but rather ambitious middle-class men, often driven by a desire to improve their station in life and make a name for themselves. They saw the sea not only as a source of opportunity and potential riches, but also as a battleground where fortunes could be won and lost. The concept of privateering fundamentally defined their work and their actions. Armed with a letter of marque, essentially a license from the crown, they were granted the legal authority to attack and plunder enemy ships, primarily those belonging to Spain. However, in practice, the line between a legitimate privateer and an outright pirate was often incredibly thin and easily blurred, and that line was often conveniently ignored when the promise of substantial profit beckoned. Their ships were specifically designed to be fast and agile, allowing them to outmaneuver larger, slower vessels, and their crews were hardened by countless long voyages, brutal storms, and fierce combat encounters. Driven by a potent mix of patriotism, religious fervor, and insatiable greed, they effectively became the sharp and often brutal edge of England's unofficial, yet highly effective war against Spain. The Sea Dogs' daring exploits were driven as much by the pursuit of personal fortune and individual wealth as they were by the desire to bring national glory and prestige to England. They operated in a complex and often murky legal grey zone, pushing the boundaries of what was considered acceptable, but their overall impact on England's rise to become a dominant maritime power was absolutely undeniable and profoundly significant. These audacious men, through their daring voyages and relentless attacks, effectively turned piracy into a powerful and effective tool of statecraft. Queen Elizabeth I was a true political chameleon, a master of strategic ambiguity. She masterfully played both sides, publicly condemning piracy with theatrical flair, while privately and quite deliberately encouraging her sea dogs to raid Spanish ships, disrupting their trade routes and weakening their global influence. The letter of marque was her secret weapon, a tool of immense power in her hands. It was a royal license that, with a stroke of her pen, turned pirates into privateers, giving their often brutal actions a veneer of legality, a justification in the eyes of the world, or at least in the eyes of England. In exchange for a pre-agreed share of the loot, the Crown offered protection from prosecution, and that all-important plausible deniability, allowing Elizabeth to distance herself when things got too hot. The system, however, was inherently rife with ambiguity and open to abuse. It was a legal grey area at best. Privateer captains, emboldened by their commissions, often exceeded their authority, attacking neutral ships under false pretenses, or raiding during times of officially declared peace between England and other nations. And when Spain predictably protested these blatant acts of aggression, Elizabeth staged elaborate displays of outrage and concern. sometimes even jailing the offending captains, but only briefly, and usually after quietly pocketing a significant portion of their ill-gotten spoils. Powerful courtiers, and indeed even the Queen herself, directly invested in these risky ventures, further blurring the already indistinct line between official state policy and outright piracy. Everyone at court, from the lowliest servant to the highest lord, understood the unspoken rules of the game. Spectacular success brought royal favour, titles and riches, while abject failure inevitably brought swift scapegoating and often a date with the hangman. This calculated double-dealing effectively transformed piracy into a de facto state industry, fueling England's burgeoning economy and simultaneously undermining the vast, but increasingly vulnerable, Spanish Empire. The Sea Dogs, those daring and ruthless captains, thrived in this morally ambiguous climate of calculated risk and high-stakes royal intrigue. Elizabeth's political cunning and strategic vision turned maritime lawlessness into a potent weapon in her quest to build a global empire. The ultimate result, a formidable navy built in no small part on plunder and deceit, and a nation poised to seize its destiny as a dominant global power. The Sea Dogs legend was forged by men like John Hawkins and Francis Drake. After a Spanish betrayal in Mexico, Drake vowed revenge, launching daring raids on Spanish treasure convoys in the Americas. His 1572 Panama raid netted so much silver it had to be buried, making him a hero in England. Drake's greatest feat was his circumnavigation of the globe, plundering Spanish ports and capturing the treasure-laden Cacafuego. The loot from this voyage doubled the Crown's annual revenue. Queen Elizabeth knighted Drake aboard his ship, defying Spanish outrage and cementing his status as a national icon. Hawkins and Drake's exploits inspired a generation of English sailors to seek fortune and glory at Spain's expense. Their audacity exposed Spanish vulnerabilities and emboldened England's maritime ambitions. The Sea Dogs became the terror of the Spanish Main. In England, the Sea Dogs were celebrated as patriotic heroes, brave Protestants defying Catholic Spain and enriching their homeland. Their raids were seen as just retribution, their loot as rightful spoils of war. Ballads immortalized their exploits, and their fame fueled national pride. In Spain, they were reviled as heretical pirates. El Draque was a name spoken with fear and hatred. Spanish accounts painted them as ruthless criminals, desecrators, and murderers. The Sea Dogs' actions were a diplomatic outrage pushing Spain toward war. Their legacy depended on prospective heroes to some, villains to others. Their daring raids set the stage for the clash of empires. Privateering was big business, backed by syndicates of wealthy investors, including courtiers and even the Queen. Investors funded ships and crews, gambling on massive returns from captured Spanish treasure. Profits were split. The Crown took a hefty share, investors and captains claimed the rest, and crews were paid only if the voyage succeeded. The no-purchase, no-pay system made every man aboard a stakeholder in success. Rewards could be astronomical, but most voyages ended in failure, shipwreck, or death. Captured prizes were processed through the High Court of Admiralty, but corruption was rampant. Crews often hid the best loot. Despite the risks, the lure of fortune kept the privateering machine running. This high-stakes model fueled England's economy and naval expansion. Privateering blurred the line between commerce and crime. Not all English captains played strictly by the Queen's rules. Some, like the infamous Thomas White, brazenly crossed the line into outright piracy. White boldly raided Spanish settlements, all without a proper letter of marque, thereby sparking significant diplomatic crises. This forced Queen Elizabeth to punish him publicly, at least in appearance, yet local officials in various port towns often knowingly protected these pirates, seeing them as heroes, bringing much-needed wealth to their communities. Local juries rarely convicted their own, and unfortunately corruption was widespread throughout. The government walked a very delicate tightrope, publicly condemning piracy to appease the Spanish while quietly tolerating it, especially when it served English interests. This local complicity effectively created safe havens for pirates and further blurred the already hazy boundaries between legal and illegal raiding. The case of Thomas White clearly revealed the Crown's ongoing struggle to effectively control its own ambitious sea captains. Ultimately, piracy and privateering became almost inseparable in the public mind. The Sea Dogs' greatest triumph, a testament to their audacious spirit, came in 1585. It was then that Sir Francis Drake, the most celebrated of the sea dogs, led a massive and devastating raid on Spanish colonies throughout the Caribbean. They were relentless, sacking ports with impunity. The sea dogs seized treasure beyond imagination, filling their holds with gold, silver and precious gems, plundered from the Spanish main. This brazen act of defiance and plunder provoked Spain, ruled by King Philip II, to launch the Armada, a massive fleet intended to crush England. But the Armada, considered invincible, was ultimately defeated by England's nimble, battle-hardened navy in 1588, a pivotal moment in European history. Crucially, many of the English captains and commanders were former privateers, the very sea dogs who had been raiding Spanish ships for years. The sea dogs' unconventional tactics, born from years of experience in raiding and piracy, were crucial in securing this victory against the larger, more cumbersome Spanish fleet. This triumph marked the definitive rise of England as a global naval power, challenging Spain's dominance of the seas. Their relentless raids drained Spanish wealth, weakening its empire. This influx of wealth fueled English expansion, funding voyages of discovery and colonization. They were instrumental in opening new trade routes across the globe, establishing a network that would become the foundation for the British Empire. They forged a tradition of naval excellence, a legacy of skill, courage and innovation. This tradition would define the Royal Navy for centuries to come, shaping its identity and its role in global affairs. After Queen Elizabeth's death, the era of officially sanctioned privateering gradually came to an end, as England sought to establish more formal relations with other nations. But the spirit of the sea dogs, their daring and their ambition, endured within the ranks of the Royal Navy. Their controversial legacy remains a subject of debate and fascination. They were heroes to England, celebrated for their courage and their contribution to the nation's rise, but they were undoubtedly villains to Spain, who suffered greatly from their depredations. Regardless of perspective, their actions undeniably shaped the fate of nations, altering the balance of power in the world. The age of the sea dogs eventually ended, giving way to a new era of naval warfare and global politics. Yet their influence echoed through the centuries, resonating in the traditions and the triumphs of the Royal Navy. They proved beyond any doubt that the world's destiny could be dramatically changed. All it took was a handful of daring captains, willing to risk everything on the high seas to challenge the established order. The Sea Dog's story remains a compelling tale of ambition, calculated risk, and, ultimately, the birth of a global empire. Their legend lives on, inspiring both admiration and controversy. It lives on wherever the English flag flies, a reminder of the daring and the determination that shaped the course of history.